Dear brothers and sisters, today begins the sacred Triduum, the three holiest days of the year, our high holy days, so to speak. Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday. The days when evil did its worst, but Jesus rose victorious and now offers us a share in his victory. You and I are accustomed to calling the first of these 3 days Holy Thursday. But it also has an older name that some of you may remember, right? Does anybody remember? Okay, remember that in the past it was called, even now also, is Maundy Thursday. The word Maundy comes from the Latin mandatum, which means commandment or mandate. In this case, referring to Jesus' commandment to love one another. And the foot washing that we have in today's gospel, and we will reenact during this Mass, not only symbolizes this love and service, it, along with the other events at the Last Supper recorded in today's second reading, also sets the stage for all that follows on Good Friday and Easter Sunday. In other words, the Eucharist and the priesthood instituted at the Last Supper are not only about Jesus' real and enduring presence, body and blood, soul and divinity. They are also about the love and service with which Jesus gives himself to us, and as a consequence of which we are now commanded, mandatum, to pour ourselves out for others. Let's look at this a little more closely. First, the Eucharist. In Paul's letter to the Corinthians, which we heard the second reading in Spanish, and in the Synoptic Gospels, we have the account of Jesus offering us his real body and blood under the sign of bread and wine, following his prayer of blessing or consecration during the Passover meal that was his last supper with his disciples. He applied all that was said of the Passover lamb to himself. Meanwhile, Jesus proclaims the following in the Bread of Life discourse in John chapter 6. The bread that I give is my flesh for the life of the world. For my flesh is a true food, and my blood is a true drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. Hence, Jesus' real presence, his real body and blood, offered to us in the unbloody sacrifice of the Eucharist. Second, priesthood. Of course, to offer a sacrifice, you have to have a priest. So, in addition to the instituting the Eucharist, Jesus also institutes the priesthood, saying to the apostles, "Do this in memory of me." Do this in memory of me. The opportunity to receive Jesus' body and blood offered in sacrifice for our salvation was not to be a one-time event at the Last Supper. Jesus now appoints his apostles to continue to make him present for future believers in the Eucharist offered in his memory. That is why in every Mass, we have the scripture readings and the Eucharistic prayer, in which we refresh our memory, recalling Jesus' teaching and actions, and especially all that he did at the Last Supper on Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Without the Eucharist, no priesthood, and without the priesthood, no Eucharist. I wish some of our young boys here truly discern their vocation and we encourage them to discern, and we wish that some of them may really choose to be a priest one day. Okay. Foot washing. On the other hand, foot washing is unlike the Eucharist and the priesthood because it has to do with the mandate rather than a sacrament. And the mandate is not about washing the feet per se, but rather a command that we undertake acts of humble and selfless service as symbolized by the washing of the feet. Our gospel says of Jesus, he loved his own in the world and he loved them to the end, which he modeled by washing their feet and then saying, I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you also should do. On Holy Thursday, all this comes together, and then at the end of this Mass, just as Jesus lives the Last Supper, headed for his agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, we will transfer the Blessed Sacrament to the side altar tabernacle for a time of adoration, keeping vigil with the Lord at the very time when his apostles were having a hard time staying awake. And at the same time that the betrayer, identified as Judas in today's gospel, sets in motion the events that will lead to Jesus' arrest and execution. Dear brothers and sisters, on the night he was betrayed. Every time we celebrate the Eucharist, we use those words, on the night he was betrayed. Every time we approach that moment when Christ comes to us in bread and wine, we begin by reminding ourselves that Christ did this on the night he was betrayed. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are careful to recount to us the ritual details of what Jesus did on the night he was betrayed. They tell us of bread and wine, of blessing and breaking, of giving thanks and sharing. But John, in recounting for us the events on the night he was betrayed, tells us nothing of bread and wine. For instead of telling us what Jesus did, John tells us what it means. And so, on the night he was betrayed, Jesus was aware of everything. He knew that the end was near. He knew that not only Judas, but also Peter, Andrew, James, and Matthew would betray him. They all would abandon him. They would, by their actions, deny him. Jesus knew this was his hour. This was the time the work of redemption would happen. And Jesus would approach this hour with the heaviness of heart that he had never known before. And at that moment, when most of us would abandon ourselves to anger and despair, when most of us would be so unforgiving for the hurt and betrayal that was at hand, Jesus did the unthinkable. He bent down, assuming the duty of the lowest of the slaves. He washed the feet of his disciples. He poured out the water, not only of service, but also of forgiveness. He cleansed and kissed their feet with the love of God that is so profound that it cuts through all our pettiness, all our prejudice, all our anger, all our hurts, and all our resentments. On this Holy Thursday, we are called to do two very simple acts. We are called to kneel before Christ in prayerful reverence of the Eucharist, and then to kneel before Christ in humble service to our sisters and brothers. And we can never do one without doing the other. For the day we kneel in prayerful reverence before Christ, but fail to kneel before Christ in humble service to our brothers and sisters, we fail to grasp what Christ and the Eucharist is all about. On the night he was betrayed is tonight. Tonight begins our journey of faith, our passing over from death to life. But it is Christ who marks the journey. Our journey begins in prayerful reverence before Christ, but must continue in service of one another. It is in washing each other's feet that God's love cleanses our world of hatred and prejudice, of fear and resentment, of a coldness of heart that knows not the profound love that God showed us on this, the night he was betrayed.
Please join in singing number 492, Sacrament of Service.
Jesus, teacher, Lord and Master, after eating with his friends, took a towel and filled a basin, washed their feet, and then he said, in remembrance, you must do as I have done. In remembrance, you must do this, for that daughters and God's Son. Simon Peter said in protest, you shall never wash my feet. You must let me, said the Savior, give my kingdom There's the one unholy flame. Our lives and our example, may your gospel strongly speak. Where your children live in hunger, where the stronghold rests the weak. Jesus, grant us understanding of the saving signs you show in our sacramental service. Let us live for others now.
Please join in singing number 692, Jesus, Jesus, fill us with your love.
Fill us with your love, show us how to serve the neighbors we have from you. Kneels at the feet of his friends, silently washes their feet. Master pours out himself for them. Jesus, fill us with your love, show us how to serve the neighbors we have from you. Neighbors are rich and poor, neighbors are black and white, neighbors are near and far away. Jesus, fill us with your love, show us how to serve the neighbors we have from you. These are the ones we should serve. These are the ones we should love. All our neighbors to us. Fill us with your love, show us how to serve the neighbors we have from you. Kneel at the feet of our friends, silently washing their feet. This is the way we should